Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to do a movie review on Nuremberg 2025. So grab some popcorn and let's get into it. Nuremberg 2025 is directed by James Vanderbilt and is based on the book The Nazi and the Psychiatrist by Jack L. Hay. The film focuses on the psychological dimension of the Nuremberg trials. The film focuses on the psychological dimension of the Nuremberg trials rather than attempting to cover the entire legal or political process. The cast includes Rami Malek, Russell Crowe, Leo Woodall, Michael Shannon, amongst others. A lineup that immediately signals the film's intentions to balance historical weight with strong character-driven performances. It's worth noting that difference in scope between the book and the film. While Jack's book covers roughly 45 years of context leading up to the trials, the film condenses this into just over a year, concentrating entirely on the period surrounding the trials themselves. That comparison shapes the tone of the film from the outset. The opening scene sets the tone immediately. A black Mercedes slowly makes its way through a mass of refugees. The camera deliberately avoids showing who is inside the vehicle, creating a sense of tension and uncertainty. Nearby US soldiers go on high alert as the car approaches. As the vehicle stops, the man inside tears a white cloth from a woman's clothing and waves it as a sign of surrender. One of the soldiers recognises the occupant. That man is Hermann Göring. The scene includes a small moment of dark humour, with Göring telling the American soldiers to unload my luggage. While that might sound exaggerated, this detail is historically accurate. Göring did in fact surrender in this way and did make that remark. It's a brief moment that immediately captures the mixture of arrogance, performativity and denial that defined him even at the end. After the opening, we're introduced to Justice Robert H. Jackson, the US Supreme Court Justice tasked with leading the prosecution. Jackson's goal was ambitious: to establish an international military tribunal made up of the four major Allied powers: Britain, America, USSR and France, something that had never been attempted before. At the time, the outcome of such trial was far from certain. While the Allies were aware of the crimes that had been committed, the full scale of Nazi atrocities were not widely known or publicly documented. There was a genuine concern that without legal precedent and publicly presented evidence, some of the accused might avoid conviction completely. Opinion among the Allied leadership was divided. Winston Churchill initially favoured the summary execution of the Nazi-captured leaders, arguing the trials could be drawn out or politically could be complicated. By contrast, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin supported holding formal trials, believing it was essential to place Nazi crimes on the historical record. As Allied forces moved across Europe, enormous quantities of evidence was uncovered: documents, photographs, films, eyewitness testimonies. The evidence didn't just secure convictions, it needed to be shown to the world. The trials became a way to make these crimes undeniable, documented and preserved for years to come. We're then introduced to Dr. Douglas Kelley, played by Rami Malek. Kelley's role was to assess the mental health of the 22 Nazi defendants and determine whether they are fit to stand trial. The bar for the mental fitness was deliberately low. Prisoners only needed to understand the charges against them, know the difference between right and wrong, and be capable of participating in their own defence. They all passed. This isn't about diagnosing madness, it's about legal responsibility. Over the course of the film, Kelley spends more time with Hermann Göring than with any other prisoners, in some cases more than several of them combined. Göring quickly emerges as the most intriguing subject: intelligent, charismatic, manipulative and fully aware of the stage he's been given. The dynamic between the two becomes one of the central threads of the film, shaping both the psychological tension and the broader question that the film keeps returning to: how ordinary or extraordinarily these men really were. The film narrows its focus to four main Nazi defendants, using them to explore different aspects of the regime. Most prominent is Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command and one of the most powerful figures in Nazi Germany. He dominates many of the scenes, both through his personality and his confidence in his own importance. We also see Robert Ley, head of the German Labour Front. Ley represents the bureaucratic and organisational side of the regime, the system that helped embed Nazi control into everyday German life. Admiral Karl Donitz appeared as well, a senior naval officer and commander of Germany's U-boat campaign. He embodies the military profession of the Nazis, often tried to separate from ideological responsibility. The fourth key figure was Julius Streicher, who played a central role in Nazi propaganda. As a publisher of Der Stürmer, Streicher represents the power of words, imaginary and incitement, and how propaganda translated directly into violence. A fifth defendant, Rudolf Hess, makes more of a limited appearance. Hess had once been Hitler's deputy before his flight to Britain in 1941. By the end of the trials, his mental state was questionable. The film reflects on the long-standing uncertainty over whether he genuinely suffered from amnesia. Dr. Kelley's wider aim goes beyond simply assessing fitness for trials. He's trying to determine whether the defendants had a shared common psychological disorder, something that might help them define the nature of evil itself and eventually form the basis of his book. In order to explore this, Kelley uses Göring as a way into Rudolf Hess, whose mental state is one of the great uncertainties of the trials. When Hess is brought face to face with Göring, he immediately performs the Nazi salute, a moment shown in the film and one that happened in real life. Whether his reaction undermines Hess's claims of amnesia is left debated. Göring, meanwhile, is constantly using these sessions to his advantage. He manipulates Kelley to gain small privileges, including the ability to pass letters to his family. These visits and communications are unsanctioned, and the film makes a point of showing Göring exploits Kelley's access and curiosity. Kelley is later questioned about how he knew the whereabouts of Göring's family after their arrest. When Göring is arrested, the film makes it clear that he had a vision of how events would unfold. In his mind, the defeat of Nazi Germany is not the end. He believes he will re-emerge as the leader of the Nazi Party, negotiate with the Allies, and play a central role in shaping the post-war world. This sense of importance is reinforced through the glimpses of Göring's past. The film briefly touches on his troubled childhood, including references to his wealthy godfather, Hermann von Epstein. Göring reflects on his relationship with the observation that just because someone appears to be your ally, it doesn't mean they're truly on your side. A line that echoes his own worldview and distrust of others. What makes these scenes particularly effective is how the film draws parallels between Göring and Dr. Kelley. In many ways, the two men are alike. Both are highly intelligent, stubborn, skilled manipulators in their own right. The difference lies in how those traits are used. Their relationship is not a traditional friendship. Kelley is fully aware of Göring's darker side, and the film never suggests that he is naive about who Göring really is. Instead, their interactions become a quiet contest of control, insight and ego, with both men convinced they will outmaneuver the other. After the footage of the concentration camp is shown, the relationship between Göring and Kelley reaches breaking point. In Göring's cell, the two men become involved in a heated confrontation. Göring insists that he had no knowledge of the camps, claiming they were entirely under Himmler's control. But as Hitler's second-in-command, the film makes it clear that his denial is difficult to accept. Even if Göring wasn't directly responsible for their operation, the idea that he knew nothing strains credibility. When pressed, Göring escalates his defence. He dismisses the footage as fabrication and turns the accusation back onto Kelley, pointing to American bombing campaigns, particularly Japan, and arguing the Allies also killed thousands of civilians. Kelley finally snaps. He draws a clear morale distinction, shouting that there is a fundamental difference between bombing industrial targets, where civilians are collateral damage, and the deliberate construction and operation of concentration camps designed explicitly for imprisonment and mass murder. This moment marks a turning point in their relationship. Psychological sparring gives way to open confrontation. Any remaining illusion of professional distance or mutual understanding collapses. From this point on, the film no longer treats Göring as a subject to be studied, but as a man fully exposed by his own arguments. One important point about historical accuracy is the character Lila, the news reporter. She is the only major character in the film that is entirely fictional. In the movie, Dr. Kelley speaks with her, she reports on the trials in the newspaper, and these interactions ultimately contribute to Kelley being dismissed from his role. In reality, Kelley did speak to a reporter, and his comments did make their way into the Stars and Stripes. However, the consequences were far less dramatic. Rather than being removed from his position, he received little more than a formal reprimand, essentially a slap on the wrist. The film heightens this aspect for narrative tension. By contrast, the character of Howie, the translator, is based on a real person. His story is portrayed accurately. Howie is a German Jew who managed to escape Germany because his family had enough money to get one person out. His sister, however, was too young to travel alone and was left behind. One of the movie's most powerful lines comes from him. 4 years ago, I left the country scared and alone at night. Now I've come back with a goddamn army. It's a moment that captures the personal stakes of the trials far better than any courtroom exchange. The film also takes some liberties when it comes to what happens to Dr. Kelley's notes. In the movie, Kelley hands over all of his observations and psychological assessments to Justice Jackson and the prosecution team at Nuremberg. In reality, this didn't happen. Kelley took all of his notes home. His intention was always to use them to write his own book, rather than to hand them over to the legal team. Kelley left Nuremberg in the January of 1946, a couple of months before Göring took the stand in March-April time of that year. That said, the legal team showed little interest in most of Kelley's material. Much of what had been written was geared towards psychological analysis rather than legal argument, valuable for history but less useful for a courtroom focused on criminal responsibility. Those notes would eventually form the basis of his book, 22 Cells in Nuremberg, which was published in 1947. When Göring finally takes the stand, the film shows how dangerous he can still be. He uses the courtroom as a stage, speaking confidently, deliberately, at times making Justice Robert Jackson appear unprepared. It becomes clear that Jackson needs support from his Allied counterparts to regain control of the proceedings. Even under pressure, Göring never fully disowns Hitler. One of the film's most chilling moments when he admits, knowing everything he knows, the crimes, the camps, the consequences, he would still have followed Adolf Hitler. A stark reminder that remorse was never part of his worldview. The film then moves towards the final act. At 11:45 p.m, the condemned prisoners are informed of their final rights and impending executions. Göring, however, never reaches the gallows. Unbeknownst to the guards, he had somehow obtained a cyanide capsule and takes his own life in his cell. By doing so, Göring escapes the hangman noose, fulfilling an earlier reference as a magic trick he intended to pull. His final act of control, denying the courts of ultimate judgment and reinforcing the film's centre theme, that even in defeat, Göring sought to dominate the narrative. The film ends by addressing what came of Dr. Kelley's work after Nuremberg. His book didn't sell particularly well, and the closing scenes show him giving a radio interview in an attempt to explain his conclusions to the public. At the heart of Kelley's argument is the idea that evil isn't confined to monsters and extremism, that it exists in some form or other in everyone. It's an unsettling conclusion. 2 years after the end of the Second World War, the world wasn't ready to hear that message. People wanted villains clearly defined and safely contained, not reflection that blurred the line between them and us. The film leaves us with that discomfort rather than offering an easy solution. On the production side of things, the uniforms were broadly solid. They're not perfect, but they were good enough to pass scrutiny, I reckon. The correct unit patches were used, including the 1st Infantry Division worn by the military police, and the 36th Infantry Division, which Hermann Göring surrendered to at the beginning of the film. These are small details, but they matter, and the film largely gets it right. One area of the film really excels is the recreation of the courtroom. The Palace of Justice in Nuremberg had been damaged by bombing when the Allies arrived. It had to be made structurally safe before the trials could even take place. The film reflects this reality well. For production, the courtroom was rebuilt with extreme attention to detail, using the original photographs and footage from the trials. The filmmakers recreated the space down to the centimetre. It's one of the most authentic environments in the film and helps ground the courtroom scenes in reality rather than making them feel like a generic set. One of the more subtle moments in the film is the scene where Rami Malek's Dr Kelley shows the ink blocks to Crow's Göring. A lot of that interaction was improvised, which helps explain why it feels so natural and psychologically charged rather than rigid or scripted. When it comes to the courtroom itself, absolutely everything that happened there was documented. The dialogue, the structure, where everybody was standing, the exchanges, all of it is rooted in the transcription official reports from the Nuremberg trials. This is one of the film's strongest claims to historical accuracy. The courtroom lighting is another detail that's easy to miss but completely authentic. The room was flooded with extremely bright lights so that the old film cameras had enough exposure. This is why both in real footage and in the movie you sometimes see the witnesses wearing sunglasses. In the film, Göring puts his on during the screening of the concentration camp footage, something that mirrors the real trial. For that scene, the actors were deliberately told not to look at the footage beforehand when doing their research for their characters. The filmmakers wanted a raw, unfiltered reactions. Multiple cameras were placed on the main characters specifically to capture their first responses as the images played, which adds a layer of realism you can feel on screen. The film ends with Göring taking a cyanide pill to avoid execution. There's a chilling parallel here. Dr Douglas Kelley also took his own life in 1958 using cyanide. Some have speculated that Kelley may have kept the capsules as souvenirs from his time at Nuremberg. We'll never know for certain how Göring obtained the cyanide, but there's a strong possibility that it was smuggled to him by a prison guard. Nuremberg doesn't ask whether the Nazis were evil. It asks how ordinary men justified it. And that's what makes the film worth watching. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this very in-depth review of the Nuremberg 2025 film. I've not eaten much of my popcorn, I have to say, so I'm going to go do that. If you want to see me review another film, do let me know in the comments below, drop me a message, anything. Let me know what movie you want me to do. I hope you've enjoyed it, I hope it's been insightful. And until then, I shall see you in the next one.